Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I have the pleasure to share with you a super exciting position. It will be about attack, counterattack, defense, and unexpected resources. Another very important and difficult element in chess is to judge correctly when should you push the attack or where should you accept that there is nothing more in the position and you do need to settle for a draw. That's one of the points where a lot of players, even masters and beyond, make the mistake that they so-called over-push. So it's important to be realistic about the situation on the board, because there are situations when it's a judgment call and you can take risks, while there are other situations that's concrete enough that if you overpush the attack, you will lose and you're better off settling for a draw. The game we'll see will be a perfect example when one side, white in our case, overpushes the game. So let's look at the position that was reached after black's 26th move in this game. Let's look at the situation as of what is going on. First of all, let's look at the material balance. Of course, each side has queens, rooks, 2 minor pieces each. White has 5 pawns versus black's 6 pawns. Of course, that may be temporary, as the black b6 pawn is hanging, although that may lead to other complications. Another thing to notice about the position is that the white rook is under attack at the moment on d6, but it's white to move, so it's no worries. Although a more experienced eye immediately would look at the safety or lack of them of the kings. In a position that we have in front of us, we see the white queen on g5 with basically 3 other white pieces helping, especially the bishop, the knight, and in many cases even the white rook can be an active participant in the attack against black's king. Of course, we need to look at both sides. Black also has an active position with a queen on f2, not too far from white's king, as well as a bishop. Even though it seems distant, it is exactly eyeing to a neighboring square of the white king. So it's clear that both sides are on the attack, and it will be a race as of who will arrive first, who will checkmate the other king first. So that's what it's about. Although, as you will see, if the sides would play correctly, actually the game should end in a draw. Well, I suggest that if you have a friend, you try to play this position first with white and your friend with the black pieces, and then you take turns. You'll play with the black pieces and your opponent, your friend, with the white pieces. Of course, an alternate could be your silicon friend as well, and try to play this position with both colors and try to understand what's going on and try to find the best way to play right here. So, hopefully you did my recommendation and try to play this position, or at least try to do analysis by yourself, maybe at least 15-20 minutes, I would say. It's a rather complicated position, and then come back and compare notes with my analysis of the situation. First of all, the most logical response here for white would be to immediately try to destroy all defense in front of the black king. So I hope this was at least one of your ideas that you have analyzed for white. In fact, it looks like a rather impressive move that wins right away. For example, white now not only that captured the pawn, but opened up the G file against the black king and is threatening with double check with the knight. And then after, if the king moves to h7, white would be ready to checkmate in just a couple moves later with two well-placed queen checks. But of course, if it is black's turn, black may be able to do something against it. So I suggest, if you don't yet know the answer, what black should do here, and this is about, of course, defensive resources or counterattack. Try to think, and only then continue listening further. Naturally, capturing the knight on g6 would fail, because checkmate would be arriving real soon. However, black has a very nice resource, namely playing bishop to h6. The idea of the move is simple. It is trying to distract the white queen from the g file, so if now queen captures bishop, black would simply checkmate with the queen. But what happened to our idea of the double check? Well, it is truly still there. However, the problem is that black now has two options: go to the left or go to the right. Of course, going to the left would allow white to checkmate on the next move. However, going to the right does right for black, and not only that, the king got out of the check. At the same time, the king has protected the black bishop on h6, and moreover, the white queen is basically trapped. White has no more decent checks. If the queen leaves the g file, then the usual checkmate arrives on g2, and finally, if the queen retreats to g3, then the problem is the pin with bishop f4. Okay, well, this was just the very beginning, the first attempt, and hopefully you got to this same conclusion, that if now knight captures pawn on g6, then bishop h6 comes, and basically black is winning pretty much right away. Now, what other move should white be looking at in this position? Well, let's look at another alternative, simply moving the rook out of the danger and capturing black's pawn on b6, and moreover attacking the black bishop right away on b7. Now think of an attacking continuation for black. Of course, if black would waste time moving the bishop, that would give white the time to recuperate. So therefore, black needs to proceed with the attack, ignoring the fact that the bishop on b7 is hanging. Black, of course, needs to get another piece into the attack, and namely the rook to c1. This is based on the idea that if now rook captures bishop, then of course the chase begins of the white king with a check, and then another check with the rook, and if white blocks the check, then checkmate in the corner. So as you can see, it is not only the black king who is in danger, but its counterpart is just as much in danger. So let's go back and look again. Rook takes pawn and rook c1. What happens if white tries to defend and of course does not allow the check on g1? For example, plays knight to h3. Now, not only that the knight protects the g1 square, but also attacks the black queen, and moreover, the black rook is also hanging, in addition to the black bishop that already was under attack on b7. So black has three pieces under attack, and yet are still in a winning position. Black basically needs to continue on that same idea which we saw in the previous variation, in doubling up the rook and the queen on the first rank, and again offering the bishop, and then start with the immediate checks, king g3, and another check with rook c3, and now the white king cannot escape for long. For example, if the king goes to f4, the check comes from c1, followed by, let's say, king e4, check, king f4, and queen e3, checkmate. Of course, when you have a queen and a rook chasing a king without any pieces defending, that's very typical. That's how the game would end. Also, if in this position the king would try to stay towards the back rank on f2, then the check would come from c2. As you can see, the rook and the queen are alternating between giving the checks to the white king, and at the end of the day, black will win again. So let's go back all the way to the beginning. Now we already concluded that the immediate aggressive attempt of knight g6 fails. The simple rook takes pawn on b6 is too slow, and black's attack prevails. What else can white try? Well, white has several options here. Let's first look at what happened in the actual game where white played rook to d7. This was a mistake, actually, because now black could have won similarly as we saw the variation after rook takes pawn on b6. Just again continue coming down with the rook to c1, ignore the attack on the bishop. We already saw what would happen if the bishop is being captured now on b7, because ultimately it wouldn't matter from where the white rook captures the bishop, whether it's from b6 or from d7, the result would be the same, queen g1 check, and then the rook c3 check, and black would win quite simply. But what happens if now white does the same and plays knight to h3? Again, the queen would just come down to f1 with the threat of queen h1 check, king g3, and then queen takes g2. And if queen d2 now, trying to protect, then still queen h1 check, king g3, and now a nice little combination, bishop g2, threatening to capture the knight next on h3. If the queen now captures, white will lose the queen real quick after a rook check, and if king f2, a second rook check. Or if we go back to the position after bishop g2 and white does not capture the bishop but plays knight f2, then comes queen g1, and basically white is in a hopeless situation, because on the next move the black bishop from g2 will make a discovered check, and then the white king won't have any safety, and black's attack simply prevails. But let's go back and see what happened in the actual game, where black thought that they do have the time to simply play bishop e4 first, protecting the g6 square, avoiding any counterattack, counter combination on g6, and then play rook c1 on the following move. However, as we shall see, time is the essence, and this move lets the win slip out of black's hand. White continued correctly by playing d5, which is another attempt to destroy the defensive pawn chain in front of the black king. Obviously, white is trying to capture and capture. But black now is very quick, plays rook c1, and here is the key situation. Queen g1 is threatening again, white has only move to save the game, and that is to retreat the knight to e2. This knight move not only protects the g1 square, but of course also creates a double attack on the black rook on c1. So now the situation is quite interesting because black has two options. Let's first see what happens if the queen captures the knight. Well, the idea is simple, simply grabbing a knight, as the white queen at the moment is unable to capture on c1 the rook, because then the checkmate would arrive immediately on g2. But white has another idea, namely playing rook to d8. Now white of course has some ideas of attack of his own, for example, such as bishop e7, or in some cases even sacrificing the rook on f8, or of course capturing on e6. Now black's best option is to capture on d5. Now let's see first what happens if white tries to play the forceful way and play rook takes bishop. Takes, check, and now the chase begins, and check again, and yet another check. Now the question is if the black king can run away. It certainly cannot run away towards the queen side to c6, because white would checkmate right away. But the king can run away the other direction by going to e6. After the next check, king to f5, queen d7, king to f4, bishop g5, king to e5, check again. Remember, white never has time to capture the black rook on c1 because the ongoing checkmate threat on g2. King d4, bishop f6 check, king c4, queen c7, king b4, bishop e7, and it seems that white almost achieved the goal. In fact, white is almost winning, because if now the king would continue to move to the a file, then white would checkmate with queen a7. The problem is that now the rook can block the check, and that will leave black with a won position. What a variation, what an escape of the black king. But in this position, after knight e2, and black capturing the knight, rook d8, pawn takes, white can actually still save the game by continuing with e6. e6 is a rather tricky move, because if now black would, for example, play queen f1 and then trying to checkmate, white would arrive first after rook takes, king takes, and now the black king doesn't run away very far, as checkmate arrives immediately with queen h8. So let's go back and see one more time. Queen e2, rook d8, takes, e6. So in this critical and crucial position, it is already black who has to be also very careful not to lose. Black actually just needs to take on e6, and now white will successfully force a draw with perpetual checks after the exchange sacrifice. Check. Again, the king needs to be careful where it goes, not to get into checkmate. Queen h8, king d7, queen d8, king c6, queen c8, king d6, check, king c7, so the king is trying to escape, but again it cannot escape. If it goes to b7, black would overpush, white would then checkmate in two moves, so the king needs to stay in the middle, and then again the game will end with perpetual checks. Quite an amazing variation. Let's go back and see what happened in the game, where black, in this position, did not capture the knight, but retreated the rook to c8. Now, if you remember, this is repetition of moves. If now white would play knight to f4, and then black comes back rook c1, that would be repetition of moves, and the best both sides could do is keep repeating knight e2, rook c8 until they reach 3 times the same exact position. And this was the moment where white got over greedy and captured on e6. This is already a losing move. Now, after the pawn captures back, white decided to play rook d2, as if now knight f4 comes, then already the position after rook c1 is winning for black. And after fe6, the game continued with rook d2, protecting the knight, but you can smell trouble here already, as white has no longer any threats, and moreover, black can win again by deflecting the white queen with bishop h6, and here the game ended. What a variation, what a game. This was the actual game. Now let's go back all the way to the beginning, and we saw that if black would have played correctly, rook d7 in the game was losing, rook b6 was also a losing option, and so was knight g6. The only move that actually would have saved the game was to immediately play d5 and close up the power of black's light-squared bishop. Now it is black also who needs to be real careful not to lose the game. For example, pawn takes pawn would lose immediately, because now after knight g6 indeed white is who is winning, because there is no more checkmate threat on g2. After d5, if the bishop captures, white at all costs gets rid of the bishop and then again sacrifices on g6 with a winning attack. So black's only move to stay in the game is to play rook c1 here. Again, try with those check threats, queen g1 followed by rook c3. And again, rook e2 is the key defensive move, and here again black would be losing if they would capture on e2, because white could play rook d8 quickly enough with the rook f8 sacrifice threat followed by queen h6. After d5 and rook c1 only move, knight e2 only move, black's only move is to retreat the rook again to c8, where of course white could repeat moves already with knight f4. Also d takes e6 leads to a draw with correct play on both sides. After queen takes, pawn takes, king h7, very interesting position by the way, bishop e7 opening up the rook's power to g6, bishop e4, rook takes, and e6. As you can see, it is quite risky for black, this position, although black can hold it with correct defense. Bishop f5, for example, queen e7, and now black needs to settle for perpetual checks with queen e5 and then queen e1 back and forth. What an amazingly complicated position, and it's a perfect exercise to play out at least one time with each color. I hope you enjoyed this amazing position and learned a lot of attacking and defensive ideas from it. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this position, it seems that white is in a hopeless situation, as the black queen obviously is active, not in any danger. Black has major material advantage. and yet it is white who can save the game. Good luck in figuring out this amazing jewel. And here is the answer. White amazingly can force a stalemate. If you haven't gotten the solution yet, this is a hint. Try again. And the answer is first giving up the rook, next giving up the knight. Of course, black cannot get out of it because then knight h6, and it is white who is even winning. For example, king h8, and then the pawn promotes, and white checkmates. Amazing. So black needs to capture, and now white pushes through. Black is up a queen and a bishop, and yet the game is a draw, as after the pawn promotes, doesn't matter how the black captures the newly born queen, it is stalemate. A true jewel. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks for listening, and please be back next week for some more chess ideas. Bye-bye.